I'm going to be using something called an absolute value. And what an absolute value is, well, for positive numbers it doesn't do anything. The absolute value of 4 is just 4. The absolute value is these symbols here. It's the two vertical lines surrounding our number. The absolute value of a negative number, all it does is strip away the negative. So the absolute value of negative 5 is positive 5. The absolute value of negative 3 would be positive 3, and so on. If it's 0, well, again, it doesn't really do anything because it's neither negative nor positive. But, 0, just the absolute value of 0 stays 0. Alright, so where I'm going to be using this is when we're adding two signed numbers, I'm actually going to be using that absolute value. So we kind of boil down the rules for addition of signed numbers, so allowing positive or negative numbers in there. If they have the same sign, we add their absolute values and keep the sign of the original numbers. So if they're both positive, we add them together and keep them positive. So 9 plus 3 is 12. If they're both negative, we add the numbers, we add their absolute values, so ignoring their negatives, 6 plus 9 is 15. And we keep it negative, because it was a negative plus a negative, it's going to be still in that direction. It's still going to be off to the left on the number line. We end up getting negative 15. If the numbers have opposite signs, what we'll do is we'll subtract their absolute values. We'll take the bigger one minus the smaller one, and then we'll give the different take whichever one had the larger absolute value, and we're going to keep its sign. It essentially wins the tug of war. When we look back at what I did up here, when it's a negative 3 and a positive 4, well, 4 had more pull, and 4 is positive, so the end number ended up being positive, whether, it didn't depend on which side this ended up on. If the 4 was the negative number, well, it still had more pull, and we ended up being negative. So, if we have a 7 and a 12, you can see they're opposite signs, so we're going to do subtraction. If we're doing this by hand, 12 minus 7 is 5. And the 12 is the one that's negative, so we'll maintain, it'll win the tug of war, so the end result will be negative. Alright, if we have a 22 and a negative 14, well, 22 minus 14 is 8. And 22 is the one that's going to win the tug of war. It's positive, so we end up with an 8. With a 7 and a negative 2, one's positive, one's negative, so there's going to be that tug of war. I'll do 7 minus 2, which is 5. And the 7, which is the one that has the bigger absolute value, wins the tug of war. It's positive, so the end result is positive. Negative 6 and negative 14, they're both positive, so I need to use this first rule. I need to combine the two of them. 6 plus 14 is 20, and I keep the same sign. They're both negative, so the result is negative. 23 and 13, they're both positive, so I add them together, I get 36. The result is still positive. Of course. Now, with something like this, where we're adding and subtracting or adding a bunch of positive and negative numbers, the easiest thing to do here would actually be to kind of group all your positive numbers together and then group your negative numbers together. So 8 plus 11 plus 12. And then I'm going to say plus negative 5, negative 21, and negative 9. This is because it's much easier to add these things together and add those things together and then combine what we get out of each of those. So the 8 and the 12 is 20. Add that to the 11, we get 31. Here we get the negative 21 and the negative 9 is negative 30. Then we add the negative 5, we get a negative 35. So overall we have a 31 and a negative 35. These are opposite signs, so we have to do subtraction. 31 minus 35 minus 31 is 4, but the negative number wins the battle, wins the tug of war, so we end up with a negative 4 here. And the process is identical when we're dealing with mixed numbers or decimal numbers. It's the same sort of thing. Of course, mixed numbers are kind of annoying to deal with because, well, they're mixed numbers. They have both a whole number part and a fractional part. So probably the easiest thing to do here would be to convert them to fractions. So 6 times 8 is 48. Add that to the 3, we get 51/8. 14 times 4, let's see, what is that, 76? No, 40 plus 16 is 56. Yeah, that's right, 56. Add that to the 9, we get 59/4. Alright, in order to add two fractions, we have to have the same denominator, so I get 51/8 plus I'm just going to double both the top and the bottom of this fraction. Hopefully you're comfortable enough with fractions at this point for me to do that. 59 times 2 is 118, so we have a negative 118 eighths. And then we would add the 51 eighths plus the negative 118 eighths. 118 minus 51 is 67. So I end up with, where in the world is my cursor down there? There we go. 67 eighths. This should be negative because when I did this, the 118 is definitely bigger than 51. So I end up with negative 67 eighths. I could convert that back to a mixed number if I pleased. I don't really want to. I don't like mixed numbers. But I would want to look to make sure that that is in lowest terms. 8 is 2 times 2 times 2, and 2 is not a factor of 67, so this is in lowest terms. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. All right, combining these numbers, 21.6 and negative 9.8, sorry, negative 21.6 and negative 9.8, adding those together. Well, 21.6 plus 9.8 is 31.4. I added them together because they're both negative, and so this will end up being negative 31.4. Now, of course, your calculator should be able to deal with negative numbers just fine. The tricky part with the calculator is, well, let me pull up my TI calculator. When you're dealing with negative numbers on this calculator, I often find that people want to say something like this, and they're confused about why it says minus answer, and if you get rid of that, well, your calculator throws an error. It says there's a syntax error. So what's going on here is that your calculator doesn't use, it differentiates between the dashes. So a dash, meaning a negative number, is actually a different key entirely on the calculator. It's this key down here. It's that key right there. And you can see when I type that in, let me do the two of them side by side, you can see they are slightly different characters. The dash, the negative rather, is smaller and a little bit bigger. The subtraction is a little bit longer and kind of right in the middle. So if I want to say negative 6, I have to do this key and then the 6. Now, depending on your calculator, the TI-36X Pro has basically the same key. It has this negative in parentheses, and it acts the same way as it does on this calculator. A lot of other calculators have a plus-minus key, and hopefully you don't have a calculator like that, because I personally don't like that style, because you can't type in a negative then. It changes it kind of on the fly while you're typing. So in any case, if I wanted to do addition and subtraction on the calculator, I could on this calculator. Negative 21.6 plus negative 9.8, and you can see it gives us the negative 31.4 that I got. I do highly encourage you to do these things by hand anyway. This is part of the reason why I waited toward the end of the video to show you how to do it on the calculator, because I didn't want people to just see how to do it on the calculator and then move on. But yeah, know how to do this stuff by hand, because it definitely will end up saving you time. There's a lot of these that make, especially some of these examples that we saw already. Actually, I guess, where was it? It was on this page, right? A lot of these examples, they would take more time to plug into the calculator than they would to just calculate. 6 and a 14, well, those add up to 20. So we get negative 20, and so on.